The first thing I remember was the sound of boots pounding up my driveway at 6 in the morning. I had barely stirred awake, the smell of last night's rain clinging to the air, when I saw them uniformed HOA officers, clipboards in hand, striding with an air of false authority. My wife gasped beside me, clutching our daughter, eyes wide with fear. "They can't do this," she whispered, but even I felt my heart skip. My family's home had been the target of HOA overreach before, but this morning felt different. Dark clouds gathered, casting a muted light across the yard, and I knew something had to give. I stepped forward, blocking their path. "Who gave you the right?" I demanded. HOA Karen, the architect of this chaos, waddled behind them with her hands on her hips, glaring down at me like a queen inspecting peasants. She was a force of entitlement and rage, her face flushed with the thrill of imagined power. "You're trespassing. You will leave immediately," she barked, her voice high-pitched and straining, as if the sheer audacity of her words could make reality bend to her will. I had no intention of leaving. This was our home. I had every legal document proving it, but these officers didn't care. They had been emboldened by HOA Karen's threats, by the whispers that power could be taken rather than earned. I tried reasoning, showing them the deeds, but each word fell on deaf ears. I felt a surge of frustration building a cocktail of anger, disbelief, and protective instinct. I could see it in my daughter's eyes, confusion, fear, the innocence of a child threatened by a grown-up's cruelty. That was when I remembered something I hadn't told anyone. I had called a few friends the night before, allies who understood real authority and loyalty. They were part of a local biker club, not violent, but fiercely protective, and they knew the meaning of standing for what was right. Within 15 minutes, engines rumbled down our street, the sound low and commanding, echoing through the neighborhood like a warning. My heart thudded with relief and apprehension. As the first of them rode onto our property, clad in leather jackets, patches glinting under the stormlight, the HOA enforcers froze. HOA Karen's eyes widened in terror, her voice faltering. "This isn't legal." But the bikers didn't argue, they simply positioned themselves between my family and the so-called officers. The ground felt electric with tension. Every muscle in my body screamed, the adrenaline of imminent conflict mixing with a sense of righteousness. Karen tried to regain control, flailing her arms, yelling at the bikers to leave. But they ignored her, forming a protective barrier around us. One of them, a towering man named Rocco, stepped forward and calmly explained, "You have no right to enforce eviction. We're here to ensure nobody crosses that line." He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, but the weight in his voice carried a command that made even the officers hesitate. I could see HOA Karen turning redder by the second, her usual bluster crumbling under the quiet authority of those who actually had our backs. Tension escalated as she demanded the police be called. I sighed, already knowing the futility. The HOA had no jurisdiction, and any attempt to escalate would only reveal their overreach. Just as she fumbled for her phone, one of the bikers grabbed it gently but firmly, showing the officer backup that no one would be intimidated today. My family clung to each other, relieved yet shaking, as Karen's schemes unraveled in real time. She was used to fear, to compliance, to bending rules and people to her will, but she had never accounted for loyalty, courage, or unity. At that moment, a neighbor I hadn't expected, Mrs. Delgado, a retired judge known for her sharp tongue and even sharper mind, appeared on the porch. She had watched this circus unfold from her window and had called ahead to the county office, confirming our property rights. She stepped beside me, shaking her head at Karen. "Enough," she said plainly. "This is harassment. You are done." Karen's face contorted in disbelief, her authority evaporating in seconds as the reality of her failure crashed down. The officers shuffled backward, their paper credentials worthless against documented law and the presence of genuine power. I glanced at my wife and daughter, hearts still racing, and felt a swelling pride in our unconventional but perfect solution. Justice had arrived on motorcycles, with steel and leather, backed by law and reason. HOA Karen shrieked, flailing as her fantasies collapsed into absurdity, a spectacle for the few neighbors who had gathered. I realized then that fear was only as powerful as the people who let it control the man today. We chose defiance, unity, and courage. This morning could have been catastrophic, but it became a testament to the strength of family and community when backed by principle. HOA Karen would spend weeks trying to explain her humiliation, but the truth was inescapable. The rightful owners of a home cannot be evicted by entitlement alone. Every engine roar, every protective stance, and every confident word had made that clear. And in the silence that followed, as the bikers dispersed and the sun peeked through the clouds, I knew we had won more than a standoff. We had reclaimed our peace, our dignity, and our power. I looked at the wooden sign we'd hastily scrawled earlier. Not today, Karen. It captured everything perfectly: defiance, humor, and justice rolled into a few messy letters. It was a reminder that courage doesn't always wear a suit or carry a badge. Sometimes it rides in on two wheels, ready to shield what matters most. My family gathered on the porch, still trembling but smiling, and I whispered, "Remember this day. Remember that no one can take us down if we stand together." We laughed nervously, the storm around us fading, replaced by the warm light of triumph. And in that moment, I realized that HOA Karen's wrath was nothing compared to the bond and resolve forged in moments like these. The neighborhood murmured, phones snapping photos, witnesses logging every ridiculous, blustering attempt Karen had made. And as word spread, other families began to speak up, emboldened by the spectacle of justice. The lesson was clear: accountability can arrive in unexpected forms, but it is unstoppable when people unite for what is right. So, dear reader, after seeing how our morning unfolded, what do you think? Was HOA Karen just unlucky, or was this the inevitable collapse of entitlement? Share your thoughts and decide what's right and what's wrong. The moment the dust settled, HOA Karen stood on the edge of our property, flabbergasted and flushed, her hands trembling as though the very act of breathing had become a challenge. She had always thrived on the illusion of control, the imagined compliance of others, and now that illusion had shattered spectacularly. Her voice wobbled when she tried to muster authority, calling for reinforcements, legal advisors, anyone who might salvage her reputation. But the neighborhood had already seen the truth. Karen's power was empty, fragile, and entirely self-manufactured. The bikers, now resting their engines, formed a protective semicircle around us, their quiet presence enough to dissuade any foolish attempts at retaliation. I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and relief. Part of me wanted to celebrate, to shout and cheer, but the seriousness of what had nearly happened lingered. This wasn't just a minor confrontation, it was a near eviction, a brazen abuse of authority designed to intimidate and strip my family from the home we had fought so hard to secure. And yet, in that very intensity, I realized something profound. Fear, no matter how meticulously orchestrated, crumbles when confronted by solidarity and courage. The bikers didn't threaten with violence. They merely stood as a living barrier, a reminder that rights, law, and decency could not be bulldozed by entitlement. Then, unexpectedly, another twist emerged. From the corner of the yard, a voice rang out, a calm, unwavering voice that cut through the tension like a knife. "Mr. Henderson, is this the family I spoke with on the phone yesterday?" I turned to see Officer Maria Lopez, a county sheriff's liaison, walking briskly towards us, clipboard in hand. She had been briefed about HOA Karen's history of harassment and overreach. "You have full documentation, proper deeds, and witnesses," she said, her gaze sweeping over the bikers and my family. "We've informed the HOA that any further action on their part will be treated as harassment, and appropriate legal measures will be enforced immediately." Relief flooded me, and I could see it reflected in my wife's eyes. The presence of an official ally transformed the scene from a tense standoff into a public affirmation of justice. HOA Karen's face turned from red to a sickly shade of pale, her energy draining with each word. But Karen, ever unyielding, tried one last gambit. She shouted about lawsuits, penalties, and fines, waving a crumpled HOA rulebook as though it held divine authority. I caught myself smiling. This was predictable. What she didn't account for was the army of witnesses who had observed every overzealous move, every illegal demand. Every neighbor who had peeked from behind curtains or snapped photos with smartphones now had evidence. The bikers exchanged knowing glances with me, silent affirmations that every overreach would be recorded and exposed. Mrs. Delgado stepped forward again, this time more forcefully. Karen, your intimidation ends here. Every attempt to evict a rightful homeowner without cause is not only illegal, it's actionable harassment. You will cease all contact immediately. Her voice carried the weight of years on the bench, the authority of someone who had seen manipulative tactics crumble before reason and law. Karen's knees wobbled. Her empire of fear, built on the trembling compliance of neighbors and the self-doubt of those she targeted, had evaporated in the face of witnesses, legality, and solidarity. As the HOA officers scurried away, muttering excuses, the neighborhood's energy shifted. Conversations buzzed, cameras clicked, and children peeked curiously from behind fences. My family, though still shaken, began to laugh quietly, nervously at first, then with increasing confidence. The storm had passed, both literally and figuratively, leaving behind the sun's light glinting off wet grass and the metallic sheen of motorcycle chrome. It was a surreal calm, almost cinematic in its resolution, and yet deeply satisfying. In the days that followed, the consequences for HOA Karen unfolded dramatically. Complaints were filed, investigations launched, and legal correspondence flooded her mailbox. Neighbors who had previously endured her tirades now spoke up, emboldened by the knowledge that someone had dared to confront her tyranny. Every attempt she made to regain dominance was met with collective resistance, both legal and social. Her so-called authority crumbled, revealing a fragile, petty character beneath the layers of bluster and entitlement. Meanwhile, my family reclaimed normalcy. The experience left scars, emotional bruises from fear and confrontation, but also a strengthened bond. We had faced an abuse of power head-on and emerged victorious. My daughter, who had hidden behind my wife during the morning chaos, now told friends at school with pride how her dad and the biker friends had saved the house. Laughter returned to our home, louder and freer than before, as we recognized that courage, community, and truth were our greatest allies. The most profound change, however, was in the neighborhood itself. Witnessing the downfall of a once feared HOA president sparked dialogue and reflection. Meetings that once humored Karen's whims transformed into discussions of fairness, legality, and communal respect. The bikers, once outsiders in this suburban tableau, were hailed as unsung heroes, not for violence, but for standing as a living shield of principle. Even the HOA board, embarrassed by their complicity, began reconsidering their policies and the limits of their authority. As weeks turned into months, HOA Karen became a cautionary tale, a vivid example of entitlement meeting its match. Her reputation suffered irreparably. Legal action and community backlash forced her into a retreat she had never anticipated, and the once oppressive aura she wielded dissolved into ridicule. I couldn't help but feel a mix of justice and satisfaction each time a neighbor referenced the morning of engines, leather jackets, and a single wooden sign that read, "Not today, Karen." Standing on our porch one evening, the sun dipping low, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, I reflected on what had transpired. Courage had arrived in many forms that day. The bikers who protected without aggression, Mrs. Delgado who intervened with authority, and even my family, who stood their ground despite fear. HOA Karen's downfall was not just a personal victory, it was a testament to the power of community, legality, and unwavering principles. In that moment, I realized that entitlement, no matter how imposing, is powerless against truth and collective resolve. So, dear reader, after witnessing how an ordinary morning turned into an extraordinary stand against injustice, ask yourself this: when authority is abused and fear is weaponized, do you stand idly by, or do you find your own engine of courage? Share your thoughts, because sometimes justice isn't delivered in courtrooms. Allenite rides in on unexpected wheels, and it waits for those brave enough to call it forward.